Welcome everyone to Emotional Intelligence and Leadership. Just as a quick housekeeping, the session is being recorded. So if you don't want to actually be recorded, just turn off your video and you won't show up. Today we have Tom Paula Cobb and Jarrell Boston as the three panelists. Could you guys introduce yourselves real quick?
Hi, I'm Paula Cobb, and I graduated from HBS in 2000. I work in biotech. I just started a new job 2 weeks ago as Chief Business Officer at a gene therapy company. That's me.
I can go next. So Tom Borchter, and no worries, Josh, no one can pronounce my name. You are not the first. So I live in Chicago, and I work for Discover Financial Services, specifically in card acquisition and affiliates. So what that means is that Credit Karma, Experian, NerdWallet, all those relationships, that's under the purview of my team. I've been at Discover for about 2 years, but before that was in the affiliate world in just different capacities, working at an affiliate vendor named Impact and then doing compliance for them before. So a pretty deep experience in affiliate. And yeah, love Chicago, been here for a couple of years. Last year was my first Ramba, so I'm really excited to be back, albeit in a different capacity than we all expected, but I'm really excited to see all your faces and answer any questions that you have. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I think emotional intelligence has never been more important.
Yeah, thank you, to Ramba for allowing me to be a part of this panel today, and thanks for my fellow panelists and our host today. I really appreciate the time. My name is Jarrell Boston. I work for PNC Financial. PNC, we're a financial services company headquartered in Pittsburgh. I've been with the organization over 9 years. I've been there since, I finished my undergrad in business at Point Park University. I've had several positions within retail lending and retail banking. Currently, I'm a senior business analytics consultant in our retail customer care center, and I work in technology, specifically focused on our employee application suite. I reside in Pittsburgh, and I currently attend Point Park University, where I'm pursuing my MBA in Management Information Systems.
Perfect. And I'm Josh Wright-Wynn. I'm the host for the session, currently go to Brandeis for full-time MBA. And then Josh, would you like to introduce yourself too? He's the support session director.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I am Joshua Dowd. I'm currently at Georgia Tech Scheller, so I'll be the assistant support director today.
Perfect. So emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence refers to the ability to identify and manage one's own emotions as well as the emotions in others. Today, we are going to focus on how do we manage both the emotions in ourselves and helping others to do the same. Okay? We have a series of questions for the panelists, so let's dive right into it. Fair? Perfect. First one, why is emotional intelligence essential to move up in an organization? And can you guys provide me with an example of when your emotional intelligence helped you succeed in business?
Happy to jump in. Oh, go for it, Paula.
No, I went first on the intro, so I think, Jarrell, you go first.
All right, I'll go first on the questions then. Yeah, so for me, there's many examples, right? This is a daily occurrence. Emotional intelligence is not something you switch on and switch off when you walk into certain scenarios. You're on as soon as you come in. But for me specifically, when I have to work with our strategy partners and executives, I really have to think about what I know about them, from not only a professional perspective, but also, if I've created some type of personal connection with that person, how do I tailor, an idea, right? If I have an idea that I'm pitching to them or a concept, something that's new to them, I really am conscious about how that message is being portrayed to them and how I think that they'll receive it. And the reason for that is I really, if I feel very passionate about something that I'm doing, and, for instance, that individual is someone who tends to not always agree with me, it's a challenge, but it is also something that, it's necessary, right? And challenge shouldn't be something that deters you. It should be something that fuels you to be ready and prepared. And I think that all of that comes together when you can make a intentional connection with the person that you're trying to get their buy-in from. So for me, you know, if it's a one-on-one situation, it's a little bit easier to navigate. But when the room is filled with, you know, mixed personalities, I really do try to make sure that everybody gets to take something away.
Paula, you want to add on to that?
Sure. I mean, I guess for me, it comes back to the fact that we're social creatures. I've always been struck by the fact that in like school, at least when I was going to school until the MBA, like the classes were always about individual students trying to ace a test. And there wasn't a lot of practice for how things actually work in the real world, which is that you're working on something together. And I work in drug discovery and development and then commercialization. And it's so complicated that no one person can actually like figure it out all by themselves. So it really, you depend on this this social nature of our ability to divide and conquer and bring together people with incredibly deep expertise in very different fields and then work on a project together. So it enables us to tackle much harder things. One of the things I've done in order to, though, like actually create that knitting together has been like on a drug launch. I'll do like an all hands meeting and I'll get the scientists from the lab who are designing the next generation of product, you know, all the way through the regulatory people, the safety people, the people who are working on the commercial launch. And we'll spend like 4 hours with each of these people talking in sequence for 20 minutes each. So it never gets deep enough that that everyone else in the room is lost. But I love these kinds of sessions because everyone walks away from them feeling seen, feeling like everyone understands what they're working on and how it contributes. And then they also come away understanding how their piece fits into the whole. So they're empowered then, or have the tools to make better decisions on their own when they go back to their own work, and understand where there are interdependencies, where it might screw somebody else up if they make one decision versus another. So it's incredibly important to kind of manage it and keep it healthy, emotional intelligence on a team.
Yeah, and I can answer that. So I think when I think of the best leaders that I've worked for, or the situation in which I've been a leader and it's been the most successful, it's the person who, kind of to follow what Paula was saying, is making sure that everyone feels seen and heard within the degree that is possible, right? And I think that this session, it could not be more timely because, at least I'm sure everyone's going through this, but me personally, the last couple of weeks, you know, Discover announced that we were going to be working from home through June, which was not a surprise, but the realization that this is official really hit a lot of people, in particular because I think a lot of the projects we were working on were ones that at the very minimum had kicked off when we were all in person, and it was just now the execution. Not to minimize the work that goes into it, you know, digital communication and all that has been, but now we're starting fresh projects, completely digital, and trying to make things launch and continue as if the world, you know, is moving forward as normal. And what I realized that emotional intelligence in scenarios, in particular when things aren't going super well, has never been more critical. So I think the one question in particular that there was, I think, a Harvard Business Review article that talked about this, but if you can get comfortable enough with your coworkers and teammates to ask, what's the story you're telling yourself? What's going on for you? What's the lens you're putting through this whenever you're hitting an issue? You can move past it. And I think that is what is going to be incredibly important for everyone to do, and not just leaders. And this is actually an opportunity for everyone to be a mini leader or to hone their leadership skills, because, you know, whiteboarding via Zoom is not the same as all being in a conference room and getting to go through a project. And so it's never been more critical. And I think that this is actually a moment in which businesses that can do this well will succeed. At teams within Discover, I can tell within, you know, acquisition, like some of us are doing better than others at this, and the teams that are doing better at like figuring out where everyone is, how are you feeling? Do you have an aging parent? Do you have a small child? Like, what's your situation? Those that can kind of integrate that into the reality of our current environment are the teams that are succeeding, and I think will continue to succeed. So I think to kind of put a fine point on it is asking that question of like, what's the story you're telling yourself, and what is going on for this person, particularly when you're struggling with them? Because it's likely nothing to do with the project or you. It's that they're stressed about a million other things in the world, and this is just one more thing, and they feel like their life has exploded.
Thank you, everyone. Great answers. It's also a great segue to the next question. So considering everything is virtual, how do you break down barriers and actually get to know someone or get someone to open up to you?
From my perspective, as often as you can build trust before you have to break down a barrier later on, before there's some kind of issue that you need to solve, like definitely invest energy in that, because it's harder to build trust and break down barriers if you're in the middle of trying to solve some crisis. And it's much easier to then come together and solve the problem when one comes along if you've already gotten to know each other and know where the other one is coming from. So definitely make investments up front and knowing, like talking to people, learning their names, learning what they do, finding out why they're there and what motivates them and what gets them excited to come into work every day. And then when there is actually an issue, I don't really focus on breaking down the barriers. I make the issue the thing. I try to explain what the issue is. I don't get personal with them or with me, but this is what's going on. This is what we're trying to do about it. Trying to figure it out, would love your help. And I work in a business where, again, in drug discovery and development, where people tend to be in that job because they really care about the integrity of the science. They care about the potential of developing a therapeutic, and they care about being able to get a medicine to patients. So if you just bring people back to that, then I find that is an incredible motivating force to get past any barriers. And then all of a sudden people aren't thinking about whatever is going on for them. They're thinking about this really motivating force in their life that brings them to work. So that's my approach.
Cool.
For me, I work to never start a relationship off with barriers. And like I try not to create them. I think that's the first thing is I try to be open and honest about who I am, and I think in turn that helps people to be open and honest about who they are. I am all about being my authentic self at work, right? I bring my whole self to work every single day. I talk about my partner, I talk about my cats, I talk about, what's going on in the current environment. I'm like really no topic is off limits with me except for some of those topics that we know we shouldn't talk about at work. But for the most part, I really try to relate to people. Sometimes I use humor. Humor is a really good tool if it's appropriate, right? You have to know who you're talking to and you have to tailor the message, but humor can be a really good way to break down barriers. If you can just get somebody to laugh, sometimes that's all you need to get in there and have a good conversation with them. I've also found that people say they're doing fine, but if you just sit there long enough and allow them to talk, sometimes they're not doing fine. And if you let them elaborate and tell their story and actually give them space and time to, for you to just listen and understand what's happening with them, sometimes just them being able to get that off of their chest so they can move on. Because think about it, with COVID, we're at home, and some of us can't escape our own realities, right? We have a lot of things going on and those things never leave, right? They're all at home with us. So sometimes work is an escape for some people at this, at this current juncture. So I've found that, just having conversations with people, kind of breaking the ice before I start a meeting, letting the group have a couple minutes just to talk about something that's completely unrelated to work, normally makes our meetings much more productive, allows people time if they're running late from their last meeting, just different things like that. So I've tried to incorporate some of those things that I would do in person, where I would stop at the water cooler, right, have that conversation with somebody and go on about my day. I try to incorporate that in because it's really easy to just get started with work, get going, and then get everybody off the phone, and and you're not really making those social connections with people.
Yeah, and I would add to that that vulnerability on your own part is often the best way in, right? Obviously, there are scenarios in which this will not necessarily work. There's always the time and the place, but I've actually found that vulnerability and honesty about where you are is the greatest way, both upwards and downwards, right? So this is people that, you're working with laterally, this is people that work for you. This is actually people who you work for in the right time and place, right? So an example would be, the news hit, right, again, that we're going to be closed through June, and everyone was kind of like pushing through with the like end of the quarter, like we all want to get through, and it's just like a really couple stressful weeks. And during my one-on-one with my director, it was like, how are you doing? And I caught myself in the moment of like, no, things are good. And I was like, actually, things are good, but, and then like I was vulnerable about my space and where I was. And then my director was like, yeah, actually, I've been feeling a very similar thing. And that dovetailed into a kind of a group huddle of our entire like small team. And it turned out that everyone was kind of feeling the same thing, but no one had really been talking about it. And so because we're not, so much of communication, right, is nonverbal, and we're not always on Zoom with our cameras on. So it was that ability to really kind of talk about what was going on. And again, we broke down some of the barriers of like the things that we hadn't been able to talk about, and people were more comfortable talking about it. And then we were able to kind of collectively realize that like, okay, maybe we reprioritize some things, make some changes, and we were able to move forward in a way that was really beneficial for everyone. And I mean, dollars and cents, the bottom line, right? We realized that like we can't do all this, and we're gonna fail at a couple of things if we don't make some changes, and we did, and the quarter ended up pretty well.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. So next up, how do you respect boundaries? How do you respect someone's privacy when they open up to you, especially with how COVID has changed how we work and it's blurring the lines between work and home?
Someone else want to lead off on this one?
I'll go since Tom in the last one there. So for me, it's kind of a three-part question, but starting with privacy in the workplace, I make it my business to assume that all information is private unless that person has specifically told me that it's not private, or I can identify that that information is general information, right? It's something that we all know, it's common knowledge. It's not something that I should have to, if I spill the beans to someone else, that I have to be like, oh my God, did I betray that person, right? So I do try to identify that early on. And then once I have people's trust, I try to understand how they define trust, because everybody defines it a little bit differently. Some people are okay with telling you a lot about their personal business, right? And then you're like, oh my God, I would never tell anybody that, right? And then you talk to someone else and they're like, oh, this person told me everything. Like, oh yeah, they told me everything too. So I guess that's just the way that they are, right? So, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But other people, when they tell you something private, that's exactly what it is, right? And if you go somewhere else and you have that conversation and you talk about something that is private to that person, well, then now you've broken their trust. So I do try to assess the situation with the individual, understand, and I'm like, okay, now I can, act accordingly. And that's really what helps me to respect the boundaries of the relationship. Now, with COVID specifically, with remote working, I've found it's been a really positive experience in that I have been able to have a lot more one-on-one conversations with people, because in a group setting, if you're in a big conference room, right, you have a break and maybe there's 15 minutes between the next, topic. You go split off, you talk to this person, you talk with this person, but there's 2 or 3 other people around, right? You're not really getting the benefit of being able to have a full dialogue. Well, now, you're in a private, virtual meeting with these people. So it's much easier to, ask one-off questions, or to be able to get maybe additional insight that you wouldn't have gotten from that individual had you not had that one-on-one time. So I really am taking advantage of, of being able to connect with people with, again, very intentionally. More recently, our director, we, with the social climate that we have, right, with Black Lives Matter movement and other social discussions and things that are impacting our climate right now, I have felt empowered to step up as a leader and have conversations with our director of our retail care center. I don't know that I would have done that in person before. I don't know that, maybe the timing was the right, timing, just based off of where we were at that time when we were in the office. But the time is right, and I have been able to, again, have this back and forth dialogue with someone, 3 rungs higher than me that I probably would not have had, on a topic that I'm very passionate about, and a topic he is also very passionate about as well. And I think it's really good for our organization that we're having these conversations, but it's also good that we're having one-on-one conversations to make sure that we're still okay with what the group talked about, right? So, that's been, for me, it's helped me to establish relationships and trust with other people that I didn't necessarily think that I would ever get this FaceTime with, so to speak.
Paula, Tom, either of you guys want to tag on? Privacy and boundaries?
Sure. I was such the boundary girl when I was younger. I think I just assumed that everybody else has massive boundaries, and I just carried that with me. And so I really try not to get super personal with people, like almost just as an instinct or how I'm wired. But I share a lot with people now. I got over my own issues with boundaries, and I try to like I will burst into song at the office, and just to try to get like a laugh out of people, or make like crazy stupid dad jokes and puns and things. So I kind of bring the pressure down by how I act, and I also share a lot about my own life. I mean, I've got 2 kids. They do all the crazy kid things. Like I have a wife that comes up, like, so I share a lot about myself, and I try to make it possible for them to share things about themselves if they want to or if they need to. But I kind of try to keep it at a superficial level, because if they do raise something that, I mean, it's a professional environment, so they shouldn't raise anything that is inappropriate for a professional environment. And then if they tell me something about the work environment, I'm an officer of the company, so I'm obligated to do something about it. I can't listen and then do nothing when they tell me that something is happening, because I need to act. So I tell people that so that they know that as well. But I just try to stay out of it unless there's a business issue that's emerging out of some kind of information sharing. And COVID has made it harder. Like it's I really try not to notice when someone is dialing in video conference from their like bedroom closet, or with the but there's all this, but you do notice. And I just try really hard not to ask questions. The same policy that I have in a normal, in the office, I apply to this new way that we're all working. But Jarrell, kind of like what you were saying, I just try to stay. I try to notice if they're trying to tell me something. So I tend not to ask, but I'll just try to be tuned for the clues. And make an environment in which they can ask or bring up an issue, and then I either just respond as a human if it's that, or will respond as a officer of the company if it's the latter.
Hey, Paula.
Yeah, I think this is oh, sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Well, just a quick sidetrack follow up. So you're talking about those clues. What kind of clues are like? Can you give a couple examples of clues?
It's often like pauses, or I mean, it's subtle things, or returning to a topic a couple of times, like just kind of touching on it and then skidding away, but then coming back to it again. People kind of dance around things, and then you start to notice that there's a donut hole in the middle of these statements that they've made, where they're kind of trying to, there's a thing there. And Jarrell or Tom, do you have other hints?
No, honestly, I think that what I have found, we're in this weird situation, like we're mentioning, Paula, where like all of a sudden you're noticing or seeing things, in particular when you're in a meeting where the leader's like, everyone have your camera on, and you're getting a window into people's worlds that we were never afforded before, and people are getting a window into your world that you never afforded before. And so I think that this is very much, at least in my opinion, like a lead by example scenario. So I think I really agree with what you're saying, Paula, where it was like, if something keeps coming up and someone wants to talk about something, like it will keep coming up. And then that's kind of your window to like, okay, like they want me to talk about this, or they've, you know, obviously started the conversation, that's your cue in. But I think just in general, my thought is that like the things that I now see or know that I would never have known pre-COVID, that's private. And I know it because of COVID, and like, unless they're bringing it up, or unless it is like something that is very obviously part of the dialogue, like they're mentioning it on a wide call or whatever, don't talk about it. Like if that you have this weird view into their world for no control of their own, same can happen to you, and you know, lead by that example. I think I'm fortunate that people have kind of been able to do that well, right? Like cats will run in the background, kids will run screaming through, and people just kind of, you know, they might acknowledge it and laugh, but there's not like a, oh, so like your kids, like is school really not going that well? You know, like people are pretty good at like, you know, okay, like maybe in a one-on-one, if they know someone, that's where that gets handled. And it's not like me, Tom, who they've maybe spoken to in like one meeting to like make a comment on. So I think, you know, in a lot of ways, I hate to say that it's common sense because like that can mean a lot to different people, but if you didn't know about it pre-COVID and you would have had no reason to know it, probably don't, you know, that's that person's private life that you're getting a window into, and, you know, you probably wouldn't have otherwise.
Perfect. So next question. We've all had that problematic person at work, right? Can you guys give us an example of where you actually ran into that problematic person, either above or below you, and how you used emotional intelligence to actually understand their pain points and recover the relationship?
I just spoke, but I can take this one if that's okay with you too.
Go
First round at least. So this actually is a thing that has happened with me more frequently, kind of with someone at my own level, because you're in this not weird zone, but this zone of like, there's no hierarchy, so to speak, right? So it's not like one of you can take the lead or one of you is expected to take the lead. And I think it kind of actually ties back to one of the first things I said, which is this idea of like, okay, like taking a step back, if you're at loggerheads for a work thing, particularly right now, I feel like I'm a broken record with any of my coworkers or here, is that like, this is never just about whatever you think it's just about. Like there is almost always something else in here that is concerning. So it's like, yeah, before you always wanted to make sure you're doing a good job at work, but now it's like, if I lose my job, if I lose my healthcare, like everything is amplified. So I think it's often being empathetic in that moment to de-escalate from your own end. So the example that I have, right, is I have been working on a big project that actually recently launched, and my co-lead, who's on like the tech side of things, really was trying to insert himself into areas that I was like, this is not really your role, and it's causing confusion and problems. And I was like getting really frustrated. And I was like, okay, take a step back, like think about, you know him decently well, like think about his scenario and like maybe set up some time to kind of go through like how his life is going, how everything's going, and actually, again, be vulnerable and open up, be like, hey, this isn't necessarily, like, I'm feeling this. What, like, and have an open dialogue. And it turned out that exactly what I had thought was like, maybe this isn't just about work, is what it was. Or it was about work, but not about this project. It was more like he was, concerned because he thought that maybe the value that he was bringing to this project wasn't being communicated to leadership because he didn't have his normal access to be able to talk about all the work he was doing. And it was just the normal concern is like, if there were layoffs or if there were ever, no one expects it, but if there were, you want to make sure that the powers that be know what you're doing. And so then I was like, aha, okay, we've identified what's going on here. We had de-escalated from both ends, right? And he also let me know the things that I was doing that were making him stressed out. And we were able to kind of put together a plan on how to actually move forward in a way that was beneficial for the both of us, but also everyone within the project. And it really worked out. Now, it might not always work out that way. I've also had it where you get in that conversation and the person shuts down and it doesn't move forward as you would expect. And in that scenario, at that point, you basically just have to kind of begin, I just want to say, like, protecting yourself and your own mental capacity and kind of like work for as much as you can. And then at a certain point, if it gets bad enough, you do have other resources for you, right? Unless you're the complete leader of the company, there's always someone to your lateral or above who can help you. And I think that's the other thing to be really cognizant of, that, no one's an island, particularly in this environment, even though it feels like it. So, you do have other resources to tackle a problem like that. You're not ever really alone in that scenario.
Yeah, I'll go. my example, I'll leave it to you all to let me know if I failed or if it didn't fail. But it pertains to a direct employee, someone who I managed, and we identified at a certain point that this person was a talented individual, but not very talented at what they were doing. And that just happened to be, uh, what they were doing on my team. And so, through coaching sessions and, different conversations, we worked on some alternative solutions, special projects, different things like that, just to, see if we could get to something that got him excited about what he was doing, right? Because none of us want to work, right? We all just want a paycheck. If we could just get a magical paycheck that came every 2 weeks or every 1 week or every day or whatever it came, as long as money was just coming in, that would be great. But the reality is we have to work. And, my thing is, this individual is struggling. I'm struggling, right, to get through. But let's try to make the best of this experience while we have this time together. So we sat down, put together a plan. Ultimately, it ended up going to performance management, right? You go from the coaching and the development and the working on the issue, and then you go into performance management, and then eventually that person makes a decision of whether or not it's going to work out for them. And ultimately, it did not work out for this individual. And sometimes that is just the case. You manage up or you manage out. And so we got to that point, but as a part of that conversation on the way out, it was, hey, I want to thank you, and this is the employee to me. I want to thank you for taking time to not give up on me, right? Not, just, say, throw in the towel, this person's not working out. Just, we got to a solution together. And I think that that's really ultimately what it comes down to. If you are, if I don't know that I would necessarily call that person problematic. It could have been a problem for me. It could have been a problem for him later. But I think that if you can assess that early on and try to work on alternative solutions, I think that that's ultimately where the success comes in. But you can really only do that through having conversations with people and trying to understand what their struggle is, and then also trying to explain to them, what is the corporate stance here, what is your job saying you need to do, what are your deliverables, what are your outcomes. And if you're ultimately not able to make or hit these outcomes and these goals, then we need to have a different conversation. So I think that's, for me, that's a scenario that comes to mind when I think about overcoming a problem individual with empathy and understanding.
I'm going to be a bit cute with the question. My problematic individual that I have to work on the most is myself, because in any interaction with another problematic individual, I'm half of the equation. And I went through this thing, especially over the last couple of years, where I was really I have this thing where I don't give up on problems, and I just keep trying to solve them. On the Myers-Briggs scale, I have no feeling, all thinking, and I keep thinking I can solve, and I'll never give up. But I've really tried to put a lot more focus in the last few years on realizing that I need to manage my own energy. I've never been much of an athlete, but I started bicycling when I turned 39 3/4, and now I've gotten into running. And doing both of those things has kind of taught me about how important it is to manage your energy when you're doing cycling or running, because you can't just sprint, right? If you're going to go a 100-mile bike ride or an 8-mile run, you have to pace yourself. But when it comes time to pace myself or to manage my kind of capacity, energy for myself and work, I find I really struggle to do that. And when I let the tank go too low, then all the other things that I'm supposed to be doing get harder. And the way that I'm able to be there for other people is poorer, and it just falls apart. So I'm really trying to be mindful of that, kind of notice how I'm feeling. In the same way, I have 2 fitness trackers, one in each wrist. But I'm trying to be mindful of my energy for myself and not let myself go too low, and try to change out of a situation if I realize that it's a suck on my psyche rather than feeding me, so that then I can be there for all the other people I need to be there for. So it's neither above or below me on the tree, like right here.
But that's a great segue into the next question is, how do I get better? How do I do like a self-test for my own emotional intelligence? How do I get better? What resources are out there?
I
What
can
have you guys
start
used?
it. I would just emphasize, like, really make it easy for people to give you feedback. Because it's the most valuable thing that you can ask for. And also, as you go on in your career, it'll get harder and harder and harder and harder for people to give you feedback. So, like, really make a strong effort to tell people that you would like feedback. When they offer you any feedback at all, like, really thank them, listen to it, reflect on it afterwards. And then you don't have to take all the feedback that you get, but like respect the feedback, because it's so useful, and it's just really, really hard for people to give it. But you can create a culture where people are willing to give it. And if you do that, then it spreads, right? So they will also feel more comfortable giving and getting feedback with others. So that'd be my top advice.
Yeah, I would also
Carol?
say, so Paula essentially stole my answer. No, I'm kidding. No, that was like a very, very similar first thought. But then the other thing that I thought about was your emotional intelligence can increase kind of the more you learn about the different people around you and like the different viewpoints around you. So I think a lot of emotional intelligence is empathy and this ability to understand that, like, while we're all, especially like, as you know, a lot of like Westernized Americans, it's like, it's the I, right? Like that's kind of the viewpoint from which we are all looking at everything. And the better you get at being able to recognize when that is your barrier, or like that's how you're entering into a scenario that is maybe, you know, could use some help and some love, the better off you'll be. So I think that, you know, it's going to sound, you know, there's a question in the chat, right, about kind of like what are the things you can do, like mindfulness, meditation, et cetera, like trainings. I mean, at least I have not personally had a training on this that I've ever found helpful, but what I found helpful is getting to learn more about my coworkers or friends or whoever it may be who are different than me in a meaningful way, and really taking to heart the thought processes and the way they look at the world. I'm never going to, like, you know, totally intake everything from a couple of coffee chats or whatever, but the more you kind of diversify your own group, the better you're going to be at recognizing in a scenario like, oh, wait a minute, like maybe this isn't my moment to step forward, or maybe this actually is the exact moment that I should be stepping forward because I understand something in this room better than anyone else, even if I'm, you know, several rungs lower, and, you know, if there's an appropriate moment to jump in, I really should do that. So I think continuing to, you know, widen your horizons as much as you can as an individual is a way to keep your EQ kind of at capacity, but also improve, right? And make sure that you're not growing stagnant, because I think, you know, in particular for me, I think about how, like, oh, I'm a progressive person and I have a high emotional, you know, IQ, et cetera, but like there's always room for improvement, especially as, you know, everyone gets older and you can get more set in your ways, just making sure that you keep being open to that idea, and that will feed directly into your emotional EQ or your EQ, at least in my experience.
Yeah, and for me, I would echo all of the things that Paula and Tom said, but I would also add, follow the trends. When you think about feedback and the feedback loop, really think about what people are telling you. You know, who that information, what's the source, or who is the source of that information, and then keep tabs on that. It's not that I dwell on the feedback that people give me or the criticism or things like that, because you can really beat yourself up that way. But if I hear it 2, 3, 4 times, there's probably some truth to it, right? So it's all about, you know, keeping some type of tabs on what people are telling you, And then identifying if you're hearing the same things over and over and over again, because if you are, then that's probably a good key indicator that you need to work on that specifically, right? So you don't have to tear the whole thing down and start from scratch. It just means that this is the part over here that, you know, you probably should spend a little bit more time focusing on. So for me, I was kind of looking at the chat with, you know, different, you know, with the question around resources and materials. I don't know that I would necessarily focus on the broader topic of emotional intelligence. I would probably just focus on the elements that are specific to me and what I need to work on. But I think that not only does that come from feedback from others, but it also comes from self-discovery, right? You have to think about what are your opportunities and then find information that is specific to helping you grow in those areas. So that's how I look at it, you know, from that perspective. But in preparation for this, I did listen to a couple podcasts on the topic, and that was helpful for me because most of it was listening to other people's stories about how they have approached this topic. So I think that that might be helpful as well, to maybe seek out some other folks who are talking about this. Not necessarily they have to be the experts, but you know, people like you, like us, right? We're not experts on emotional intelligence, but we're here talking to you about it today from our perspective. So I think that that's probably another place to look for some guidance.
Not to double dip, but one other angle on this, like emotional intelligence is kind of a modern thing, but as a concept, but like sales has been around forever. And I was never in sales really. I did like marketing and other kinds of jobs. But I've come to sales later in my career in the context of business development, which is like, it's so much about that, about like who are you trying to get to invest in your company or to buy your product, to acquire your asset. Like, what is motivating them? What is all the research that you can do around them to understand what kinds of deals they've done before, like getting really smart about it, understanding the politics in their organization, all the, like, it's like you can't do it well unless you get really good at EQ. And so I think just like, you know, going out and like availing of trainings that help you to be better at that would also help with internal kind of context where it's not explicitly a sales context, but so much of internal work within a company is also kind of disguised sales because you're trying to get people to do something and you need to understand, you know, you need to get them to want that. So how do you do that? And there's a whole, like, you know, millions of years of people trying to teach each other and understand and learn how to do sales.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so now we move into the general Q&A. If anyone has any questions in the chat, by all means, please chat them, and then we'll ask the panelist. One that came in a little bit ago is emotional intelligence, there's a fine line and you can go too far. How do you actually identify going too far and going into the realm of like people pleasing or something else?
I just stay really far away from the too far end. I give myself a margin of about 150 yards. So maybe someone else would do it, have a more thoughtful answer to the question.
Well, I guess my thought is that like I don't look at emotional intelligence as something where you're like trying to get someone what they want necessarily. It's more of being able to accurately identify what is going on in a scenario so you can move forward. So you're not moving forward if you're just people pleasing and the problem still persists, right? So I think the way to frame emotional intelligence is like, are you accurately understanding exactly what is happening, not just like the brass tacks of maybe the presentation you're working on or whatever, to understand the broader context of why something isn't going correctly. And if you're people pleasing and just like giving up everything, like in the scenario where you're trying to like use your emotional intelligence to get to a solution, you're not really getting to a solution. You're you know, giving everything up. And so to the point well taken, right, that like some people would maybe just start to give everything up, but I think that it's pretty easy to feel in those scenarios that like, you know, okay, actually this is not what I really wanted to do or get out of this. And so I need to push things forward in a way that, you know, I understand something, but maybe like I've got my line in the sand here. And so I mean, maybe a practical way to apply that is to kind of, when you go in with this kind of like your emotional intelligence hat, kind of you've already assessed, like you need to really think with an emotionally intelligent mindset is like, okay, like what are my boundaries here? And so it's like, you can understand that other person, but meeting in the middle here or meeting to a certain point is what you've got. And then if you can't get there, then you kind of move on to plan B. But I think, you know, you can avoid doing that if you really kind of structure the way you want to have something solved in any scenario you're facing.
Yeah, and I kind of look at it too from the lens of emotional intelligence, and it's not all roses, right? It's there are some people who they want you to talk straight with them every time you have a conversation with. They don't need any of the fluff. They don't need any of the extraness. They don't want to know about how your day is going. They don't want to know about your cats. Although I want to tell them about my cats, right? They don't want to know about that. So it's being able to identify who that person is and understand that you're not offending them. That's just how, that's just how the message needs to be received by them. And that's okay. Like not everyone is ready to for you to get to know them on a more intimate level. They just want to work with you, and that's fine. There's a place for that in the workplace, and we just have. I think it goes back to respecting people's boundaries. Like if someone has clearly put that boundary, it's not negative, but it is something that you have to be conscious of, and you can't keep coming at that person a certain way and expecting that they're going to react any differently than they have in the past when you tried that approach. So I would say that too. It's not about people pleasing. It is about understanding that individual and communicating in a way that is mutually beneficial for both parties.
Perfect. Another good question in the chat. Any advice you guys have for someone who isn't self-aware or is unable to communicate their needs or wants, or appears unwilling to? How do you interact? How do you get through that?
I always just anchor it back to what our objectives are and what the person's job objectives are. I mean, they can need or want things that aren't related to the job objectives, but if there are things that are getting in the way of the objectives of the job, then it's explaining the impact of that on the team, explaining that impact is unacceptable, and refocusing them on the things that they are supposed to be doing, and then requesting that if there's something that is getting in the way of that they communicate what that problem is so that we can then work on trying to solve that together. But it's not so much about whether they're soul searching and bringing these things forward. It's about, are things getting in the way of the work? And that's a great place always to re-anchor any kind of issue with a person showing up on the job.
Jarrell, either of you guys want to expand on it?
I think I'm okay. Actually, Jarrell, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, the next one.
Yeah, I was just trying to think about. Yeah, maybe we should move on to the next one. Yeah.
So the next one is in the same space too. So as we talked earlier, COVID has changed a lot of things, right? And it's given you a more intimate look into other people's lives, right? How do we balance empathy around their situations that we now have information and access to, with them needing to actually produce and perform if there is a performance issue?
I don't think that's any different than how you would handle it in person. I think that process has to be very specific, and it has to be fair, right? You have to, when you're getting down again, when you're getting to the matters of performance and performance management, that needs to be across the board for everyone. That's not to be said the treatment leading up to that you don't have to style flex and understand that person and try to work with them. But once you've entered that realm of, you're not performing to standards, we've had the conversation where we've tried to work on this and we tried to make things better, things are not getting better for whatever reason, and maybe even you've shut down and now you're not communicating anymore, at a certain point you do have to make a judgment call and know when you flip that switch, right? It's different for every person. I think that's where the judgment comes in. But once you start it, it has to be the same across the board, because now you're opening yourself up to other types of issues where you did not apply the same treatment to someone because you're trying to exercise empathy or you're trying to do something where, in those cases, a lot of those things have already flipped to black and white. Again, that's not saying you don't work with the person leading up to, but I think once you've reached that point, you have to apply fair standards across the board to everyone.
Yeah, and I think actually it's funny.
Tom, go.
Beck put something in the chat that was actually what I was thinking, which is that the first question asked is like, has your company made any adjustments to the fact that we're all in a completely different world? And if they have, and you still are having these performance issues, like, right, I think I totally agree with what Jarell is saying, which is that like, you kind of then go back to the best practices. But I think the first question is like, is what we're asking actually realistic for anyone? Like, you know, I don't have any children. I have a puppy that is not a child. But like, you know, my coworkers who have children at home or have an aging parent or have an underlying health condition that like puts more stress on them, to expect them to perform at the exact same level is unrealistic. You're setting yourself up, the whole group up for failure. And I think the thing that I think about is that, you know, almost immediately when, you know, early April, I, you know, work in marketing acquisition, our budgets were, you know, we took a whole look at what we were planning to do for the rest of the year, and everything was made more realistic, right? It was like we had to give budget back, so we had to save a bunch of money, and that meant that we took our expectations down. And I think that there's a version of that that also, fortunately for me at Discover, occurred within work, right? We still expect a lot of people, but we by no means expect the exact version of work on the same timetables within the same rigor that we did before. Now, again, that doesn't mean that you don't expect your employees to perform. You don't expect, you know, your coworkers to perform. But I think you'll get much further and do better as a group if you understand like this isn't going to look the way it did before. Now, again, there are going to be some people who are just like really, really struggling or like for whatever reason aren't going to make it. And I think then the only thing I'll add to what Jarell was saying is that like you would hope that in that scenario, there's almost this recognition that like we probably wouldn't be having this conversation if it weren't for the fact that X, Y, and Z. And again, trying to work with them. Again, it's not a perfect scenario because there's going to be that outside case where you just can't move forward and then you have to handle that situation. But I think you will find that it's a very small percentage versus, you know, this idea that like you're plowing through, we have the same goals, everything is exactly the same, when it's like, well, no, it's not. And so hopefully, right, you're not in a scenario where that's what your business is doing. And I think if you're a business leader, that's the first thing to think of. And that is the first thing that I experienced at Discover. They were like, we started getting daily emails from our CEO that were like, here's what's happening. We understand that everyone's struggling. Here's what we're doing. Here are your resources. They bulked up on resources for employees, and it's been very successful. So hopefully that is a scenario that we can all kind of move forward to for probably, you know, the next, 6 months to a year.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Like as when COVID happened, rules got put in place. A lot of expectations went down, right? Like in the beginning, no one come into the office. And then gradually at my company, we've been getting back towards something that can be sustained. But it's like we recently did away, we had an informed consent for a while for people coming into the office, that I acknowledge that by coming into the presence of other humans, I may encounter COVID. And we just did away with that because it's not consistent anymore with with our evolved policy, which is that people need to go into the office at least like once a week. And it creates challenges with people who do have issues where they aren't confident to go in, but at some point the job is the job, and a company is there to do a certain thing and in a certain configuration, and we can't just drop pencils and walk away from it forever. So kind of managing that path back is a very kind of precarious path of keeping people on board and hearing when there are issues and finding a way to make it work. Maybe when we get past all of this, we will have a lot more empathy when we go back into the role. Because Tom, what you were saying about how I mean, we're all going through this particular thing together, but aging parents, sick kids, like those are perpetual. That will be there when COVID is long forgotten. And so having sort of a better understanding of what's really important, what needs to happen for sure, and what can we just let go of because it doesn't matter so much at this moment. That would be nice if that can come with us into the future.
Perfect. And with that, we have just about 3 minutes left. I want to take the time and thank Tom, Jarrell, and Paula for coming on today and talking about emotional intelligence, and also Josh for co-hosting this. And thank you all for attending and also being part of Rampa. We'll stay on for a little bit afterwards if you guys have any questions or you want to ask anything else. But other than that, I want to respect your time and let you guys go. Cool?
Happy Ramba.
Happy Rama!
Yeah, and thanks, Josh, for leading us through this. I really appreciate it. You've done a great job as a moderator, and it's not easy to make things go smoothly, so thank you.
Yeah.
If there's still time, I have a quick question for Paula.
Sure.
Kind of following on what you were talking about towards the end. One of the first jobs I had after my MBA was in a new business for a media agency, and we would have these RFPs, and we would have to like just prepare for these to go into battle to pitch this business, this sometimes $500 million business in a matter of a week. And I just thought at one point the pace of business has gotten to a point that it doesn't really regard so much the work-life balance and and everything. And it's like, does it really need to get done tomorrow? Does it, compared to like say 20 years ago, before fax, before email, before electronic, DocuSign, the pace has accelerated to the point in the last 20, 25 years that it's almost, will we ever go back a little bit? What do you? I mean, not that I needed to slow down, but it seems like what I heard from you guys is that we're kind of acknowledging that things aren't the same. They won't be the same, and there's a kind of a lowering of the bar. Not that the bar needs to be lowered, but I just wonder, do we really need to get back to that relentless pace?
I've spent a good amount of my career working in other countries, France, Switzerland, Ireland, and working with people from a lot of other countries too in a kind of international context. And Americans are just out of control. Like when we go on vacations, we bring our laptops, we dial into meetings, so I don't know how we fix that. I mean, there are benefits for being all, kind of off the hook, but I, back to my, my problematic person, our whole country is a little bit just, too intense. And it is hard to stay healthy and to stay balanced over that kind of a period. And so I don't know the answer to all this. Maybe if COVID can help us to cure that, then that would be a fantastic silver lining in all this.
Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions for anyone?
Thank you.
All right, we'll close down the session. Thank you everyone again for attending.